Yoko Ono's application for adjustment of status to that of a permanent resident alien was granted. John Lennon's application for permission to change his status to a permanent resident was denied. Special Immigration Judge Fieldsteel then authorized the grant of his application for voluntary departure and granted him a period of 60 days to effect his departure from the United States.
What sort of appeal process does this follow? Can this follow?
Counsel for the respondents may, if he wishes, file an appeal within 10 days from having service of this decision. The appeal is to the Board of Immigration Appeals in Washington. It's an independent arm of the Attorney General. The Board of Immigration Appeals is not a part of the Immigration and Naturalization Service.
On what grounds were they denied? Was Lennon denied?
John Lennon's application was denied because he was found to have been convicted of the crime of possession of cannabis resin, and under the immigration law, any person convicted of a narcotics offense cannot have his status adjusted.
A lawyer's personal feelings are really not relevant at this point. And permit me to say that this is the government's press conference. And I think that Mr. Marks is doing a very good job with a very difficult task. And I would prefer, truly, to defer any comments on the case until we've had an opportunity to study a very, very difficult and carefully written decision, and until we've actually determined the course of action.
Where are the Lennons now?
The Lennons are now on the West Coast.
Secondly, what were your arguments, your principal arguments, against the government's case? Why did you say John Lennon was not deportable?
Some of you may recall that the only testimony given in the proceeding was that cannabis resin was not marijuana, nor was it a narcotic drug. We have constitutional arguments. We had arguments which took us 80 pages of an initial brief and then some additional pages later on. And I think it really unduly impinges upon Mr. Marks's time. I think this is an opportunity for the press to find out why Mr. Marks' agency, it's not his decision, but why he commenced these proceedings, why the hearing officer came to these conclusions, and I assure you that when we consult with our client and after we've reached a determination, the press will know what action will be taken.
Do you know whether it is automatic to begin?
Fieldsteel found both John Lennon and Yoko Ono deportable on the grounds that they remained here longer than permitted by law. Excuse me, Mr. Wiles? And John Lennon had submitted applications for a change of status from visitors to permanent resident aliens.
There was some activity going on in England on that. He was trying to have the decision reversed.
That is true, and I think if you read the decision, you'll find that Mr. Fieldsteel goes into that, and he's satisfied, and I am too, that his reasoning is sound.
Mr. Marks, can you tell us a little bit more about Judge Fieldsteel's reasoning? Yoko and John made a rather dramatic plea here, in tears, I guess, for them both to be allowed to stay here, though, so they could both search for Yoko's daughter, saying that if one stayed and one goes, she was being forced.
Well, I wonder whether it might be productive for me to read that to you. One last point merits discussion. The respondents are confronted by a legitimate legal and emotional dilemma rising out of their fight for custody of Mrs. Lennon's 9-year-old daughter by her former marriage. The record indicates that the last legal proceeding relating to this custody was an opinion by the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, Cox versus Yoko Ono, decided March 30, 72. Exhibit 15A, in which the court affirmed the decision of the District Court of the Virgin Islands modifying the divorce decree between the parties and awarding the care, custody, and control to Mrs. Lennon, subject to the right of reasonable visitation by the father. There was also a court order in effect issued by the Court of Domestic Relations of Paris County, Texas on March 7, 72, granting Mrs. Lennon the custody of the child, provided that such custody may be exercised at any place within the territorial limits of the United States of America. Obviously, in order to enjoy such custody, Mrs. Lennon is required to remain in the United States, a requirement which is now made possible of solution by the grant of permanent residence to Mrs. Lennon. On the other hand, it can hardly be an entirely satisfactory solution for her if Mr. Lennon is required to depart from the United States. The situation is further compounded by the fact that the respondents have been unable to locate the child, and thus, although they are legally entitled to her custody, the reduction of that theoretical right to practical custody has not been achieved. Thus, the law, which is enforcing the departure of Mr. Lennon from the United States, has been unable to enforce its own edict with regards to the custody of Mrs. Lennon's child. However,
In John Lennon's case, why did you begin deportation proceedings?
well, under the law, we have a mandate to proceed against any alien that's illegally here.
Didn't Mr. Wildes ask for a delay?
I suppose he might have asked for a delay,
What?
but he also favor of the excludable offense.
Is he allowed to apply for a residence visa again?
Well, under the state of the existing law, he would find it impossible to get a visa for permanent
In
residence.
other words, he could not ever reapply or reopen the case.
That's correct.
What if
Suppose
the conviction in
the
England
crime
was
in London
expunged?
was expunged.
Suppose it was his. Well, it'd have to be a new trial. A pardon does not reach this kind of offense, although under the immigration law, a pardon for almost any other criminal act would negative it, as though it never existed. But it does not reach this kind of an offense.
So even if he's no longer considered to have...
What to do about that conviction? I'm an enforcement officer in this district, and we have a law to enforce. Mr. Lennon comes within the provisions of the law that require his deportation.
If any kid on the street had been picked up with the amount of marijuana that Mr. Lennon was picked up with, that case would have been dismissed, most likely, and you're throwing him out of the country. What, is this not somewhat overkill?
I think you have to go to the Congress and make those representations. A third preference visa petition, which conceded.
Permit me to say that the decision is 47 pages long. I've gotten to page 44 to tell you how far advanced I am in considering it. As far as contacting my clients and discussing it with them and advising them, the only contact that I've had with them today is that I've received a flower from them. So all I can say is that this is a matter which will have to be given very careful consideration, and that I'll consult with my clients and give them the best advice that I can.
Will there be an appeal? Will there be an appeal?
That's a matter that I have to take up with my clients, naturally.
Personally about
that flower.
what you know so far.
They know about the decision. Let's see the flower, sir.
Do they know about the
They
decision?
know about the decision.
I would imagine that they have already been telephoned by a member of their staff here this morning. I have not spoken to them myself.
Feel about this?
Where are they?
Recommend, although it's a very lengthy decision, that you just read the decision, because all of my arguments are treated, perhaps not in the way I would like. We had a number of arguments. Among them was the fact, were technical arguments with respect to what cannabis resin was.
Proceedings against
Yogo